The Interstellar War College on Lyra 7 had no windows. It didn't need them. The ceiling of Lecture Hall C simulated a perfect view of the planet's lavender sky, complete with drifting vapor spirals from the distant methane seas. Inside, the air was clinically climate-controlled and saturated, with the scent of neutral sanitizers and old metal. Rows of cadets scaled, furred, shelled, and sleek skins sat in tiered seating around a central holographic display, some still in training gear, others in half-donned exoframes, all bored. Cadet Caleb sat alone in the back row. He kept his elbows on the fold-down desk in front of him, hands steepled just beneath his mouth. His regulation fatigues were clean, though the collar looked slightly too tight. The way human necks sometimes made clothes designed for multi-species conformity looked subtly wrong. His gaze never left the holograms. Down on the lecture floor, Professor Thurek circled the main projector like a lion orbiting a fresh kill. His artificial chestplate gleamed under the lights, decorated with 11 medals inset into its alloy, each a token from a campaign older than most in the room. His remaining biological arm, scaled and pale green, gestured lazily as the next hologram flickered into view. This is Earthborn urban combat, circa 2043. Mid-level engagement during the Greater Lagos drought riots. The footage was raw, unsteady camera feed, rooftops shrouded in smoke, civilians screaming in the background as armored riot police moved through a shattered alleyway. No drones, no grav shields. Just boots, batons, and tear gas. Muffled chuckles began almost immediately. A Nezari cadet with bioluminescent facial fins pointed at the screen. They ran out of suppressor rounds? Why not engage from orbit? Look at the armor, snorted a four-armed Yarak next to him. Cloth and plastic. That's not even real plating. A ripple of laughter grew across the chamber. Primitive, said the Valari cadet in the front row, his voice a low hum from behind his faceplate. Reckless, added another. Professor Thurak nodded slowly, arms behind his back, face split in a practiced sneer. Indeed, Earth's combat legacy is a study in desperation, throwing bodies at problems, wading into chaos. These engagements lack elegance, coordination, logic. The laughter deepened. Some cadets mimicked the grainy footage mock charges behind desks, exaggerated dive rolls, over-the-top shouting. A Galdan in the second row flipped its translator off just to laugh in its native shriek-click rhythm. The atmosphere buzzed with smug superiority. Caleb didn't blink. The footage rolled on, a trench network in muddy terrain, soldiers lunging with bayonets and soaked uniforms. Smoke and fire, screams again. A flicker showed an exhausted soldier hauling a wounded comrade through wire-cut fencing under fire. This was called World War I, Thurak said with a smirk. Note the utter lack of aerial support, no energy weapons, just steel and powder. A war of inches, millions dead for what amounted to what was the term. He paused for effect, turning his head toward the class. A stalemate. A chorus of snorts followed. In the back row, Caleb raised his hand. It wasn't abrupt, it wasn't dramatic. He just lifted it and held it there, wrist locked, fingers straight, palm open. The room quieted slightly, like a pack sensing the odd behavior of its prey. Thurak tilted his head. Yes, cadet? Caleb lowered his hand and said, I'd like to demonstrate. A long beat followed. Someone chuffed. Another tried to muffle a laugh and failed. You want to demonstrate Earth combat? Thurak said with arched brows. Caleb stood, moving with deliberate calm. I'm a black belt in judo, and I taught riot control tactics on Earth during the water riots in 41. I think it might be educational. A laugh exploded from the middle rows. The Valari cadet in the front leaned back in his seat, exojoints hissing. Judo? Is that the one where you slap each other with open palms? Martial arts, someone added, giggling, like dancing but angrier. Caleb said nothing. He didn't smile. Thurak folded his arms. Very well. Pick your partner, Earthborn. I'll take Goran, Caleb said, nodding toward the Valari. The room oozed anticipation now. Goran rose, cracking his heavy knuckles one by one. His natural chitinous armor gleamed under the lights. 8 feet tall, easily 400 pounds of muscle and reinforced bone. His mouth curled in open glee as he stepped toward the sparring mat at the center of the chamber. I'll try not to bruise your bones, he said, tone mocking. Professor Thurak waved his hand. Begin when ready. Caleb stepped barefoot onto the mat, his movements compact and quiet. Goran rolled his neck theatrically and took a wide stance, ready to charge. Then he did. A blur of motion, limbs like tree trunks hurtling forward. Caleb shifted. His grip found Goran's forearm. He pivoted on the ball of his foot, bent his knees, and executed a clean Seoi Nage. The Volari cadet hit the mat with a thunderous crack that echoed through the lecture hall. The room froze. Goran tried to get up, snarled, but Caleb stepped in, gripping the arm again and throwing Osotogari this time. Another impact. Louder. The Volari wheezed, twisted, tried brute force, but his balance was gone, redirected at every turn. A third throw. Goran's arm extended to break his fall, and pop. The cadet howled. Caleb immediately disengaged and crouched beside him. Don't move. The room was deathly silent. Caleb pressed his thumbs gently along Goran's upper arm, then paused. Dislocation at the glenohumeral joint. Your shoulder's out. He looked up at Thurak. I can reset it, with permission. The professor was still. Proceed, he said quietly. Caleb took a breath. Goran, I need you to exhale when I count 3. If you tense, it'll tear more tissue. Goran, dazed but semi-conscious, nodded faintly. 1, 2, 3. A sharp motion, a grunt, a wet, audible clunk. Goran's body slackened. Caleb stood, wiping sweat from his brow. His own breathing was heavier now, a flush visible across his skin. He had a bruise blooming along his right collarbone, and his left wrist trembled slightly from the last throw's torque. He looked at the room. That was restraint, he said, flatly. No one laughed, no one moved. He returned to his seat, chest still rising and falling. He didn't gloat, didn't even glance around. Just sat back down and crossed his arms again. Professor Thurak cleared his throat. When he spoke, the smirk was gone. Effective, he said. There was a long pause. Then he added, more carefully, tomorrow, a new training module will be added to the syllabus. He didn't look at Caleb, but his voice dropped a fraction as he said it. Earth combat, optional no longer. The next day, Lecture Hall C didn't fill with the usual sluggish energy. Cadets filed in early, no joking, no casual stomping or banter in native tongues. Even Goran arrived 15 minutes before the bell, his arm supported in a metafoam sling, chitin cracked in 3 places along his bicep. He didn't speak, didn't meet Caleb's eyes, but he sat near the front closer than usual. Caleb entered last. He walked with a slight limp now. His right foot had taken the full brunt of one of Goran's weight shifts in the final throw. Not broken, he'd been x-rayed that morning, but the swelling hadn't gone down entirely, and the skin over the metatarsals was purple and tight. He didn't ask for sympathy, didn't mention it at all. But he walked slower. Professor Thurak was already in place, arms behind his back, eyes unreadable. When the bell chimed, he didn't bother with a hologram. He simply gestured toward the center mat again. Today's lesson, he said, will be led by Cadet Caleb. That alone sent a ripple through the room. A few cadets glanced toward each other. 1 or 2 adjusted their posture like they were preparing for a trap. Caleb stepped forward, took a long breath, and faced them. I'm not here to prove anything. What I showed yesterday wasn't magic. Wasn't even that dangerous. It was physics, structure, and control. You think Earth combat is chaos, but it's not. It's discipline applied to uncertainty. He waited. No one interrupted. Every species has their strength. The Volari are built like tanks, the Yarak coordinate like hive clusters, the Galdan think in probabilities before their enemies even blink. But Earth evolved different. We didn't survive because we were the strongest, or fastest, or smartest. He paused, then added, we survived because we didn't give up when those things failed. Thurak's head shifted just slightly. I'm going to teach you how we fight when nothing else works. Not with lasers, not with doctrine, not with orbital superiority, but with movement, with touch, with leverage. Caleb looked toward the display wall. Load, simulation set, Earth grappling fundamentals, judo variation. The AI flickered, then filled the space with slow-motion replays of human fighters. Not in armor, no helmets, just judogi robes, throws from different angles, sweeps, holds, submissions. The same fight Goran had endured but slowed, annotated, dissected. The class watched. No one laughed this time. Caleb gestured. You, and you, on the mat. The first was a Galdan with wide shoulder joints and reverse-jointed legs. The second, a thin-boned Alari with quick twitch reflexes. The third, another Valari, smaller than Goran, but still armored and strong. Caleb walked to the center, removed his boots, and set them neatly beside the mat. I'm going to show you 3 things. 1 per cadet, and none of it is about strength. First, the Galdan. Caleb pointed to its hip. You lead with that leg when you move. Watch. He stepped close, gave a light push, and as the cadet shifted instinctively to rebalance, Caleb dropped into position and performed a Kauchi Gari, a minor inner reap. The Galdan tumbled gently, more surprised than hurt. He stood quickly, head nodding in disbelief. Next, the Alari. Caleb faced him. Your center of gravity is higher than mine. That's good for reach, bad for balance. He waited for a strike, ducked under, then flowed into a Tai Otoshi, sweeping the cadet's legs in a fluid pivot. Down again, fast, clean. Finally, the Valari. Caleb breathed. He was sweating now, favoring his injured foot more noticeably, but he didn't hesitate. The Valari charged, eager. Caleb shifted aside and used Harai Goshi, a sweeping hip throw. This time, he didn't slam the cadet. He let the momentum carry the body over and down, gently enough that the Volari only grunted on impact. The hall was silent. Professor Thurak finally spoke. Why not strike? Caleb turned. Because, in close quarters, striking breaks your own structure. One punch can end a fight, or it can end your hand. He lifted his bruised wrist slightly. Control means knowing when to not cause damage. One of the Yarak raised his hand. You could have broken Goran's arm. I didn't. But why not finish the fight? Asked the Inzari. Because real combat isn't about domination. It's about ending the threat as fast and safely as possible. You don't get medals for bleeding. That quieted them. Most looked unsure now. A few, like the Alari, looked thoughtful. Even Goran gave the smallest of nods, the kind that didn't mean approval, but understanding. The rest of the day was drills. Caleb didn't throw again. He walked among the pairs, correcting stance, demonstrating grip. He tapped elbows into place, redirected shoulders, adjusted cadets' weight over their heels. Once, he stopped mid-sentence, pressed a palm against his side, and winced. Probably a rib strain. He took a few breaths, resumed. When the bell finally rang to end the module, no one moved right away. Thurak stepped forward. His voice was lower now, with a faint grit to it. Cadet Caleb, this methodology, it will be formalized into the curriculum. You will assist in creating the training outline. You will be compensated. Caleb shook his head. I'll do it, but I don't want extra credit. Why not? The professor asked. Caleb hesitated, then said, because I want them to learn it for real, not just to tick a box. Thurak gave a single nod. Later, as the hall emptied, the Valari Caleb had thrown approached him. You move like something hunting. Caleb glanced up. Not hunting, surviving. He shifted weight off his foot again. The bruise had deepened, now a full black stripe from ankle to arch. You should see the med bay, the Valari said. I will, Caleb answered. After dinner. You sure? Yeah. I've dislocated my shoulder before. Twice. It'll hold. The Valari grunted. You're very soft inside. Caleb laughed softly, shaking his head. Tell me about it. The Valari's head tilted. Yet you fight like you're made of angles. I fight like I have no choice. They stood for a moment in silence. Then the Valari offered a gesture, 2 fingers pressed to the chest, a salute of informal respect among his kind. Caleb returned it. As the hall dimmed and emptied, Professor Thurak stood alone by the control panel, watching the replays again, Caleb's throws in slow motion. He didn't smile. Instead, he whispered under his breath, almost too softly for the room to catch. Pray they never fight us for real. 2 weeks later, the aches had mostly faded. Caleb's limp was gone, though his left wrist still bore a support band. On Earth, he'd have been told to rest it for 6 weeks. Here on Lyra 7, the Academy's medbay had protocols built around rapid cellular acceleration and deep tissue regrowth, but Caleb declined anything beyond bone imaging and compression wrap. No shortcuts, he told the medic. The body remembers what it earns. The human recovery time puzzled them. Not just its length, but the stubborn refusal to bypass it. That week, Lecture Hall C had been reconfigured. Gone was the single mat. Now, 6 grappling circles filled the chamber's center, while one corner held a motion capture grid, medical scanner, and data station. Caleb stood beside it each day, now wearing a patched uniform with a small black rectangle stitched over the heart, non-faculty, non-cadet, but authorized. The newest curriculum module, unarmed human engagement techniques, non-lethal control, tactical movement, and redirective force. Cadets arrived earlier than ever. Even those uninterested in the techniques themselves came to watch those who tried and failed to replicate them. Most cadets, even the more analytical species, struggled with balance under contact. They were used to force and formality, fighting as an extension of their species' military doctrine. But Earth combat required intuition and discomfort. It required feeling someone's weight shift and knowing what came next. And so, most failed. Hard. It wasn't humiliating anymore. It was fascinating. They fell, got up, adjusted, tried again. The Volari learned to roll. The Ilari learned to shift center. The Galdan stopped relying on pre-mapped reaction timing. Judo demanded presence, not pre-programmed reflexes. And Caleb? He moved slower than before. Deliberate. Always watching. Always with a slight tremor in his bad wrist, or a grimace if he overextended the foot he'd bruised. Some of the cadets had started calling him Instructor Stone. Quiet. Heavy. Unmoving unless absolutely necessary. Professor Thurak sat in for every session now. He rarely spoke. When he did, it was usually to ask questions he already knew the answers to, framing them in ways that made the cadets confront their own assumptions. Cadet Olvin, why did your sweep fail? The Yarak cadet hesitated. He was heavier than expected. Wrong. He let you feel that weight. Then shifted. Earthborn techniques invite imbalance. They use what you expect against you. Or, Cadet Lurik, why didn't you counter the throw? The Galdan shook his head. It happened too fast. No, it happened when you assumed speed didn't matter in close quarters. You were trained for open-field predictive combat. This is not that. One morning, as the module began, Thurak handed Caleb a data pad. Tomorrow, we rotate to terrain simulations. Caleb scrolled through the files. Urban layouts? Collapsed infrastructure. Debris zones? Civilian presence? No live ordnance. Caleb nodded. We're moving into riot control? Thurak said nothing at first. Then, I want them to understand fear. Not just tactics. Fear's easy, Caleb muttered. It comes free with breath. Thurak studied him. I served 32 years in the Keth campaigns. I saw planetary sieges that lasted half a standard cycle. I've seen minds break long before bodies. But you, he paused, you carry fear like a veteran, not a cadet. I was a peace officer in Denver during the 41 water riots, Caleb replied. 12-hour shifts, gas masks. We didn't get orbital support. We got rubber bullets and a crowd 3,000 strong. Thurak squinted. Why didn't you quit? Someone had to keep people alive. The professor looked at him a long time, then nodded. I'll clear access for you to adjust the terrain variables, teach them chaos, show them how to function in it. Caleb tilted his head. You trust me with that? No, but I believe in results. The next day, the simulation lab reeked of heat and density. Steam jets hissed from pressure valves. The floor was uneven, scattered with simulated rubble. Audio files of panic played on loop. Not real screams, just enough to fog the mind. Cadets entered cautiously, already sweating. They were issued no weapons. Only gloves, padded vests, and the directive, control the zone, extract civilians, subdue threats without lethal force. Caleb activated the scenario. The chaos hit immediately, moving targets, shifting lights, overlapping sound cues, randomized aggressor AI. One cadet slipped on broken tile and was trampled by civilians within seconds. Another froze mid-charge, her species' photosensitive eyes overwhelmed by strobing lights. Caleb moved through the simulation not as a participant, but as an observer, a shadow in the fog, correcting, adjusting, pulling cadets aside. No wide stances here, you'll trip on debris. Don't push into the crowd, redirect it. Watch the elbows. You're using your arms like clubs. You should be a wheel, not a hammer. By the end of the drill, Only 3 cadets had successfully cleared their zones without injury. Caleb gathered them around. You think combat's about dominance. It's not. It's about management under stress. It's logistics of the body, geometry under pressure. He pointed to one of the failed groups. If this were a real riot, your casualty rate would be 70%. The cadets flinched. But, he added, you're learning, and that means you're adapting. And if there's one thing Earth does better than anyone else, it's adapt when things fall apart. Thurak stepped beside him. He didn't address the class this time, just stood next to Caleb as they watched the recordings. You weren't trained in war, he said softly. No, Caleb replied. I was trained in keeping people alive long enough to not need war. Thurak watched the footage of a Galdan cadet successfully using a hip throw to redirect a charging aggressor drone. I think that's harder. Caleb didn't answer. That evening, as the sun simulation dimmed in Lecture Hall C, a group of cadets lingered in the corridor. They didn't leave when the class ended. Instead, they approached Caleb's station, quiet, respectful. Can we stay late? One asked. Why? Caleb asked. To practice, said another. He nodded. No throws, just movement drills. My wrists acting up again. As they began pairing off, Thurak passed by, hands behind his back. He paused just outside the hall's exit and turned slightly toward Caleb. The next time someone mocks Earth tactics, he said quietly, I'll tell them to pray. Then he was gone. 6 weeks after the first throw hit the mat, Caleb stood in front of a new class. Different room, different cadets, all first years, eager, raw, unscarred by the Academy's deeper curriculum. The Lyra 7 War College had moved Earth combat from specialist elective to core foundation, a change that made a lot of senior faculty uncomfortable. Some pushed back. Professor Thurak didn't. He had written the recommendation himself. Caleb hadn't seen him in 3 days. Word was, Thurak had taken a leave to review interspecies doctrine archives, recalibrating strategic assumptions in light of non-technological resilience factors, which sounded exactly like something Thurak would do to avoid saying, we missed something important. Caleb didn't care. Not about the politics or the ripple it caused in the officer track. He cared about this room. 30 new cadets. A dozen species. Not one of them taller than Goran or faster than Alari, but all with the same flaw, no sense of gravity. Not physics, personal gravity. Their own. Their opponents. They didn't yet know what balance felt like, what momentum could do when shaped like a lever instead of a weapon. That would change. All right, Caleb said, stepping barefoot onto the mat, his voice sharp but calm. Today's lesson is simple. He raised a wooden dowel in one hand, holding it vertically. You don't fight the opponent, he said, letting the dowel drop from his palm. You fight this. It fell. Hit the mat with a quiet clack. Gravity. He pointed to a Zanari cadet near the front, long-limbed and sleek. Come on. The cadet hesitated, then moved to the mat. I want you to push me, Caleb said. The Zanari stepped forward, placed both palms on Caleb's shoulders, and shoved. Nothing happened. Again. Another shove. Caleb shifted 1 foot backward, absorbed the momentum. Now, I push. He stepped inside, lowered his center, placed a single palm against the cadet's chest, and moved not hard, but with purpose. The Zanari stumbled backward, nearly tripped. It's not force, it's direction. The Earth Marshall principle is that leverage beats power. Every time. He looked at the rest of the class. The mat doesn't lie. You'll feel the truth when you hit it. Later that day, he limped into the medbay. He wasn't hiding it anymore. The foot had taken a turn, swelling returned, the bruise had crept back like an old argument. The medtech gave him a disapproving look the moment he sat down. I told you 6 weeks ago. I know, I iced it, I elevated, I didn't overdo it. She scanned him. Hairline fracture at the second metatarsal. You definitely overdid it. He winced. So it's broken now? Not fully displaced, but it will be if you don't stop walking on it. I'm putting you in a stabilizer. I have a class tomorrow. No, you don't. Not if I flag your medical clearance. He sighed. I'll teach seated. You'll teach after 2 weeks of non-weight bearing, or I'll assign a Yarak intern to explain human biomechanics. That's your choice. He paused, then nodded. Fine. The stabilizer boot went on. Ugly, gray, Velcro straps that made every step hiss. Still better than a full cast. Caleb leaned back against the medbay wall and finally allowed himself a deep breath. The tech sat beside him for a moment, quieter now. You know they started asking for extra mats in the dorm halls, she said. Cadets. Volunteering for midnight drills. He looked at her. That doesn't surprise me. Not to fight, she added, to practice falling. Caleb's brow rose. She stood, packing away the scanner. Most of them think the lesson is about how to throw, but it's not. No, he said softly, it's about what happens after. Caleb returned to his quarters with the help of a walking stick made from repurposed drone plating. Evening on Lyra 7 was simulated, but it still felt like dusk. The temperature dropped slightly, the lights dimmed to a cooler hue. Outside his window, the holographic skyline shimmered with projections of distant orbiters and nebulae, a vista designed to remind cadets what they were being trained for. War in stars. He leaned against the glass. Then there was a chime. The door slid open to reveal Goran arm out of the sling now. Chitin plate still cracked along the upper limb, but healing clean. The Volari cadet stood taller somehow, though nothing physical had changed. I hear you're off duty. Doctor's orders, Caleb muttered, gesturing to the boot. I brought something. Goran held up a training dummy, Volari-sized, weighted, padded. He set it down inside the room, careful not to bump anything. I built it from old drone cores. Caleb nodded once. It's good. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Goran asked, Why didn't you hurt me worse? Caleb looked up. You could've. I didn't know it then, but now I do. Caleb exhaled. Because there's no glory in gravity. Winning a fight isn't the same as surviving it, and hurting someone to prove a point isn't the point. Goran tapped a claw against his own forearm. I think I respect that. You think? The Volari let out a low chuckle. I'm still Volari. We come around slowly. A pause. Then, you taught me something, not just about movement, about restraint, control, that it's not weakness. Caleb leaned back. That's the hardest part to learn. They sat a while longer. Eventually, Goran stood, nodded once, and left the room, dragging the dummy with him. 2 days later, Professor Thurak returned. He didn't make an announcement, didn't call a meeting. He simply walked into Lecture Hall C during the last 10 minutes of a drill and watched. Caleb was seated off to the side, booted leg elevated, watching the cadets go through breakfall practice. He didn't notice Thurak until the professor stepped beside him. You created something, Thurak said. Caleb squinted. A course? The professor shook his head. A bridge. Between doctrine and instinct. Between species. That's harder. Caleb looked back at the mat. One cadet, a Enzari with weak hip flexors, nailed a rear fall perfectly, rolled right back to his feet without losing momentum. He smiled faintly. Takes time. Thurak handed him a data pad. What's this? Your certification, instructor level. You're now authorized to teach Earth combat modules on any interstellar war college campus. Caleb blinked. You're serious? I've been many things. Serious is the least of them. A pause. But yes, it's signed. Caleb took the pad, scanned it. Denver would have laughed at this, he muttered. Earth doesn't laugh much anymore. No, Caleb agreed. But maybe now we don't have to shout to be heard. Thurak gave him a final nod. Rest that foot. We'll need it again. 3 months later, Earth combat wasn't just curriculum. It was doctrine. The phrase gravity first defense appeared in 2 war games. The motto leverage over power showed up on a fleet's training patch. And a holovid titled The Mat Teaches Everyone was uploaded anonymously to the Central Cadet Network, showing grainy footage of Caleb dismantling Goran. The comments were respectful. A few were even reverent. And in Lecture Hall C, the new mats were scuffed, worn, and irreplaceable. Because falling, as it turned out, was the first thing every species had to learn. Not how to avoid it, but how to get up afterward.